Hey y'all. Today we will be talking about the episode Emanations. This is an episode where Star Trek decides to do something rather ill-advised, which is discuss the topic of afterlife and religion to some extent. Now I know you're going to ask because all of you tend to comment on every little thing I do in these videos. It's cold down here, and as I've mentioned before in the past, recording down here is basically the only means I have at the moment where I'm not going to get in the way of other people, or they're not going to get in the way of me. So I get to bundle up because I'm still not doing so hot, and frankly, I'd really like to stay at least relatively warm. So you get to see a zebra pattern, and I get to stay warm. Hey, that works out for me. Um, One of the things. Okay, let's actually talk about the episode just really briefly. In this episode, they find this asteroid where there's all these bodies, and they. Spoiler alert, there are people who are supposed to have been sent to the next emanation, but in fact, they just kind of end up there dead, and then at the end, they were like, oh my god, maybe they really were going to the afterlife after all. They never actually talk about it in great detail, and I'm kind of skipping over a lot of bits because Star Trek tends to handle religion very poorly in general. And I think most of the reason for that is because generally what happens, and this is not exclusive to Star Trek, television in general tends to have this problem. They will take a topic like religion and they will get on a soapbox, basically. They will talk about their views about religion. They will talk about what it is they think about religion. You follow me? And as such, rather than actually having an actual, oh, I don't know, discussion about the matter or any revelations about the matter, what we get is some guy on a box saying things that are just nonsensical, stupid, ridiculous, extremist, wrong. You get the point, right? And when I say wrong, let's make something absolutely clear here. If you believe in something, that is not wrong. If you believe in something very strongly and have an opinion on it, that is also not wrong. If you tell me my opinions are wrong, congratulations, you are wrong. Now, oh goodness. See, I'm trying to think of where to start. I've had a rule for many years, after experience with talking with people. It should be fairly obvious, based on everything that you probably know about me, that I tend to enjoy discussion. I enjoy debate. I do not enjoy argument. I mean, in my opinion, the only difference between an argument and a debate or a discussion is the fact that an argument is when one side or the other, or both, get too volatile about the situation and stop actually discussing it. They stop actually thinking about whatever they're talking about, and they just kind of start going off of the handle, if you understand my meaning here. So I'm not opposed to differing viewpoints, of course not. But in all my years, there are certain topics I simply avoid. I have learned that no matter how you present your thoughts or your discussion or your process on certain topics, people will either understand you sort of, they will misinterpret you in a favorable way, in which case they will wholeheartedly agree with you and basically there's no actual discussion. They will misinterpret you in a negative way and they will get all angry at you for, whatever reason. Or they will, if and this is funny because I've tried the neutral tone, trying to speak it in a complete vacuum. That doesn't work either, because then people think you're not taking it seriously and they tend to get upset, blah blah. There's no winning, if you understand. Now, let's be fair, this is a generalization. Obviously there are people out there that I can discuss volatile issues with. And that volatile nature is basically what it boils down to define all the topics I try to avoid. Topics that engender a strong emotional response within somebody are the kind of topics I try to avoid for all the reasons I've just listed. And religion, letting the cat out of the bag, because I've never really talked about most of the topics specifically. I haven't even mentioned them, because even mentioning them tends to be a problem. But we're out here, okay? Religion is one of those topics. I will also say spirituality is one of those topics, because I am one of those people who does believe that those two words are separate, segregate. Now, that means ultimately I actually don't have a lot to talk about in this episode, within this episode, because I'm sorry, my mind's going a little bit faster. Because ultimately, so much of this episode is completely 100% centered around religion. Okay, what I am going to talk about is my changes to this episode, and as I mention them, I will mention things within the episode I actually did enjoy and did enjoy the presentation thereof, and a couple of things I didn't. First of all, I am going to talk about one thing before I really get into the changes. It's something I would eject in its entirety, okay? When they beam Kim by accident, Harry Kim, over to the other side, they end up with one of their people in return, and they end up resuscitating her because she was recently dead. And let's be honest, you can't. We now have the technology and capacity to bring someone back who has only been dead for a few minutes, so no problems there. And got her up and running. I wanted to talk about this later in detail, but I just want to say briefly now that I do want to give some props to the way they handled the Harry Kim side of things. On paper, I could see where they were going with this episode. The idea seems show two different sides of the coin with regards to the concept of the afterlife. Someone who has come back from it, and someone who has reached it. You see where I'm going with this? The problem is entirely in the execution, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I do like the way they handled the Harry Kim side because Harry is actually quite respectful and honorable in the whole thing. And when I say honorable, I don't mean like he's a Klingon. I mean when you treat someone else's. If someone else believes something you don't, and you treat it as though it has a degree of reverence, you honor it. That is what I'm referring to here. Just because I don't believe in blah doesn't mean I have to spit on it every time I see it. Doesn't mean I have to treat you as any less of a person, and doesn't mean I don't have to give some kind of dignity to it. You understand where I'm going with this? So, and I'm talking about real beliefs, by the way. It's too easy, as with the word opinion, to use the word belief as kind of a shield for stupid and wrong and evil behavior. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real beliefs, something core. You understand? So I liked the way that Harry, he had several lines. I meant to write them down, but I didn't actually take any notes at all this time. Um, he had several lines which were basically on something along the lines of, I don't know, what happens to your species after you die. I don't know what happens to my species after I die. And I have no right to tell you that you're wrong. And earlier in the episode, he has another wonderful line where he basically says, for all I know, all that's left is your corporeal forms in that asteroid. Now, I did see those. I can prove that. But that's just the body. And the implication there is obvious that there is more than just the body, and that he is saying that it is not only possible, but actually feasible, that what these people's belief is true. You understand where I'm going with this? Even if Harry Kim to himself does not believe that, it doesn't matter, because he has the capacity to respect that. I liked that. On the flip side of the coin, we have Janeway and her approach to that poor girl. It's basically the exact opposite. Everyone that the poor, I can't even think of her name, the poor woman on Voyager, the one who comes, who was in the afterlife, she is treated in such a horrific manner. It's basically like, okay, I want you to picture that you are someone who genuinely believes in the afterlife. This may not be difficult for you to do depending on the individual, but I mean genuinely, again, core. You believe that when you physically die, what is really you keeps going, okay? Now let's say you wake up, you die, and then you wake up, and you're in a hospital. And it's like, huh? And all you have is people around you who are being the most uncomforting, almost callous people possible, talking about in such blunt manner that, oh yeah, by the way, we found all your people, they're all just corpses on an asteroid. Yeah, ain't that great? Don't worry, we'll figure out what happened to you. That's not the first thing on your mind, is it? So the general portrayal for that poor girl was terrible, and I might add, one of the things the girl herself brings up is, am I going to be stuck on this starship for a while? There was actual thought among several people I know who was watching this episode as it came out, that this girl would actually join the crew for a while, because we hadn't quite had our virginity destroyed by the lack of continuity that Voyager tends to employ. But moving on. And so we were like, it was like, okay, she'll stay on the ship, but no. Voyager tends to take an interesting view for how to deal with continuity, or how not to deal with continuity. I've talked about this before. So they just kill her off, basically. I should say literally. They literally kill her off. And Janeway gives this one little line about, oh, she's where she should be now. Keeping in mind, Janeway herself fervently does not believe in the afterlife, and therefore genuinely thinks that this woman being dead is correct. Not that she's off in, whatever the next emanation actually is. No, she's dead. Yes, you could argue that. but you get the presentation. The whole thing was just executed so poorly. Even if the core of the gem material was there, as I mentioned, on paper. No. Let's get right into my changes, okay? I want you to imagine for a moment that there's a planet of people who have extremely limited space contact, okay? And let's just say they're basically bound within their own solar system. In other words, they do not have faster than light travel yet, okay? That's important. As Forgive me for getting into the geek side a little bit, but anyone who knows that if you don't have faster than light travel, your basic reach is extremely limited unless you're willing to go with generational ships or some kind of suspended animation sort of thing, and both of those carry significant risks and are very long term. So, in other words, your limit is your own backyard, right? Now, these people have a severe resource problem, probably compounded by the fact that it takes so much time, effort, and energy in order to harvest resources from the other parts of the system for their home planet, which is the only one that's habitable, by the way, that the net gain is very small, and it's a continuous problem, and so is population. Okay, these are the precepts I'm setting out here. Now, on this planet, there's a generally accepted rule across all the countries and across all the civilizations. Let's go ahead and say that they're not a unified world, because honestly, I get really tired of Star Trek doing that. A lot of people commented on that. I'm not going to go into full depth because everybody knows about this, but Star Trek tends to have a whole planet as one person, basically. One culture, one unified thing. And that's because Star Trek writers tend to forget that the planet is huge. When I tend to write things, I tend to think on the continental level at the highest level, as in, that's the world in relative equivalence, and even that is consistent of multiple upon multiple cultures. Forgive me for segueing for a second, but for example, in my campaign I'm doing right now, the main continent, the mainland, where everything is going to be happening soon enough, is huge and involves so much. In fact, I actually invented three separate forms of transportation that would enable the players to actually get around in some time faster than a few months, if you follow my general logic here, because it's a continent. Continents are big. I want you to try walking from one end of Europe, just Europe, to the other. You get the point, right? Moving on. So, on this world, the generally accepted rule is that people have to deal with this overpopulation problem. Some countries deal with it maybe by enforcing a population cap, one child or perhaps two children if it's male, something like that. Or some places force people to go into labor, things like that. We're going to focus on a single country, okay? That's the country that we're going to be dealing with in this episode. In this country, they have a law set where everyone is allowed to live up to a certain age, okay? Doesn't the matter doesn't the number doesn't matter, so I'm not going to get into it. But once you live up to that certain age, you basically are now in debt for every year you live after that. You follow? As such, you have to pay in either in directly in terms of taxes or in work credits. Actually offering to work basically without pay for the government in order to justify your life. Okay. Now, obviously, some people will simply accept death, and there are certainly humane ways to deal with this. Now, in this country, there is a part corporation, part church, part what's the word I'm looking for? Helpful place. Charity. There we go. Charity organization. This place deals with what they call death credits. Okay. You can go there early before your time is up. Choose to die willingly in a process that they allow, and they go have this whole thing. And by the way, it is tied into their beliefs in the afterlife. At least this country's. We could go ahead and say that this one country has one primary religion. Obviously, there's probably going to be people of other religions, but for the purpose of the episode, we'll go ahead and say there's one major religion for this country. Okay. So this is not. I'm saying this because I'm not saying we're throwing the religion or the afterlife thing out of this episode, because as usual, I have to limit myself, right? Let's just try and approach this a little bit better. So this is heavily tied in. What they do is they will take you and they put you in this machine that they've specifically designed in a way that is supposed to directly send you to the afterlife. If you follow where I'm going with this, it will. It's not like a teleporter. Okay, that sounds a little silly. It's more like a way to speed things up. Now, so they have this system, and you could go there early and either get do this in order to die, in order to get death credits, or in fact actual money, depending on what you prefer, for a benefactor or benefactors. You could have a whole account for your family, for example, and you could choose to die and just give the credits to the account so that everyone in that family gets a few more years. You understand where I'm going with this? Okay, now, I'm going to give away the twist early. The people in charge of this particular corporation came into contact with another alien race, which basically through happenstance had found uh, okay, this company had found on one of their planets this device. It's basically the device that they're using here. When they tried to use it, nothing happened and they just kind of left with it. But at some time later, this ship shows up. It's a ship that found what came out at the other end, okay? Now, they think there's some potential in this because what they did was they sent a person through. Now, this is going to be important. I'll mention this later. But the person came out at the other end with traces of a very valuable resource to these aliens on on their surface, on their skin, or something like that webbing they had in the actual episode, something like that. Now, they quickly decide to try and come with a deal with these aliens because the aliens do want more of this. Now, I want to stress these aliens are not bad people. That's going to be important later, or rather earlier, because I'm giving everything away early. But these aliens basically set up a deal with this company. Okay, you send people through this thing, we get the valuable resources we need. We pay you. You use those resources in whatever manner you deem fit, right? And this also enables certain people to, if they wish to, willingly let themselves die, either if they have a terminal illness or if they just want to have more life for their family than themselves, whatever, right? It's considered to be an overall beneficial circumstance, given the rather horrible circumstance that the whole planet is in. You follow where I'm going with this, right? It is, however, probably immoral and at the very and I want to stress that it is my opinion, and this is the stance the episode would probably take, that what these people are doing is probably disrespectful. Disrespectful of that major religion, which they are basically exploiting for their own gain, okay? Even though it is a relatively beneficial circumstance, they are still doing so in the wrong ways for the right reasons. You follow where I'm getting with this? Or perhaps for the wrong reasons and also for the wrong ways. It depends on your angle. Nevertheless, it is my opinion that that would be exploitation, which I would think would be bad. Moving on. Let's cut back to the episode proper. So, as they're going through, they encounter this asteroid, this area, whatever, and they start scanning and they see this resource. Now, let's say it happens to be a resource they're aware of and they could use a certain amount of it. But then they find out it's on these people and they start to get confused and they're like, okay. Now, as they're doing this, same basic thing in the episode happens. There's a flash, there's a vacuole, and they try to beam back and they can't because as they're teleporting, the thing was activating and thus Harry gets sucked back through it, okay? No person's dropped off. I would completely abandon that storyline, as I mentioned. Now, I've talked before about how I like to do a bit of a rotation thing, try to get every character, A, B, C, and occasionally D-list character, some kind of time in the spotlight, right? This, in my opinion, would be a good episode to have Chakotay and Kim as the major characters. As Harry Kim, wakes up on the planet, there's all sorts of problems with that. Now, I want to stress that very few people at this company are truly aware of the extent of their deal. The higher-ups, certain people who help design and move the machine, and that's basically it, actually. They have kept this rather airtight because everyone involved knows what severe problems they would have if the people of this world who strongly believe in this particular method of afterlife, the second emanation, if they knew that these people were exploiting their belief and abusing it basically for money, for all intents and purposes. So they've been keeping things very quiet. So Harry wouldn't encounter, suspicious supervisor or anything like that. He probably wouldn't encounter anyone like that for a decent while, if at all, for that matter. Instead, he would encounter people who genuinely believe he's someone who has come back from the afterlife, and they would be curious about him and curious about everything he has to say and what's the next world like. And I wouldn't change much about Harry's interaction with several of the people there. For example, one of the guest stars of this episode would be very similar to the guy who is actually in the episode, who has decided to willingly die at a fairly young age so that his wife can have all of his years. And I would have probably made her a little bit less one-dimensional of a character, have her genuinely broken up about the fact that he's leaving, have her genuinely not wanting him to go through with this, that kind of thing, right? But he believes that it is better that she lives a long and fulfilling life without him. Not something that's hard to understand, really. Now, as Harry is dealing with that, back on the ship, the aliens show up. We'll call them the Bobs, because I don't feel like naming anything right now. No, wait, hang on, I got a better idea. We'll call them the Samsungs. And the Samsungs are like, hey, what the heck? But no, in all seriousness, they see another ship around their valuable resources, which they need, and they're automatic. And the people are, in fact, examining those resources very carefully. So obviously, what the conclusion they come to is immediate. And they begin to be hostile, and Voyager tries to negotiate with them and settle them down, right? This is where the Chakotay storyline would come in. I would love to see Chakotay, again, actually be a damn diplomat, actually be able to talk through these people, because once it becomes clear that Voyager is not Voyager was in fact here to steal their resources. They didn't know that. And once Chakotay lays it out and says, we haven't taken anything, we haven't done anything, in fact, here is what happened. And we're just trying to figure out, at this point, they have a way to actually work with the aliens, and the aliens start working with them, and they find the common ground, and in fact, Voyager, for example, helps them refine their process. And I want to stress this part. They find a way to extract those resources without desecrating the bodies, which is what they've had to do before because their technology was so limited. And that is a fact that has always caused problems and friction within these people, because these people want to not be grave robbers for all intents and purposes. They've always hated that fact. The fact that they can leave the bodies in what they consider to be a proper burial is something that they would appeal to them. And in turn, they share some of their information regarding the planet and the deal they have. Everything I mentioned earlier, giving you the spoiler alerts. And so they take the ship back to the planet, and they encounter them. And at this point, Harry comes to the forefront because they contact Harry, and Harry is brought up to speed on everything. And at that point, Harry and Chakotay both, with no actual interaction with each other, have the same reaction of basically righteous rage. You understand where I'm going? The kind of, I can't believe you people are doing this, and they go and try to confront the people, and the net result would be that they end up confronting and proving that this company had been doing this, and the company tries to defend themselves, of course, because we have a resource shortage and we're just trying to help. But the counter argument to that is the obvious one. You're not helping the research shortage, you're helping yourselves in a resource shortage, which is true. These people are not in the right. Let's make this clear. Because ultimately they were out for their own gain in a situation that was not optimal. No different than anyone else who has climbed onto the backs of others in order to make themselves better. And so this corporation basically gets shut down, and this would be the moment I would love to have where, people are like, what happens, God, and then the response could be very obvious. And again, there would be that line, which I barely wouldn't change. And I would have Harry Kim give it, you realize that was just the bodies we found. That's all we found on that place, nothing else. Who knows what happens to the rest, just something to show that it's not necessarily a horrible thing. Now, any of you who have been paying attention probably picked up on the catch. I'm mentioning this here. I would not mention this in the episode. Rather, I would give you the information, but I would never do this thing, because I don't do this. Sorry. I really get tired of that in Star Trek. And you know me, I prefer subtlety. I mentioned earlier that they did tests. Actually, I don't think I did mention that. I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to mention it now. Earlier in the episode, the aliens who made the deal would basically mention how they started doing tests. Maybe we can send other stuff through because they need this resource. It's something they actually require. Okay, this isn't a greed thing. This is something they need and use in order to keep their ships running and their engines going. That kind of thing. Okay, their society kind of requires it, and they are a major provider because they found this source and they made this deal. You with me so far? So they said, try sending other stuff through. And they did, and nothing would ever produce this material. Nothing would ever actually come out with it. Even if they sent someone who, and this is important, even if they sent a corpse through, nothing happened. It only happens when they send someone who was living at the time. Now, they do die in the process. But in the process of coming out, a living person provides that resource. And the whole point for there is that there is just a little bit of a detail there, little bit of a maybe, basically. Actually, it's not even a maybe. That's the wrong word. A little bit of an unexplained. A little bit of something for anybody out there to latch onto if they choose to and say, Because Harry Kim's right. How do they know that these people aren't actually going to their second emanation, and all that's happening is this is a byproduct of that happening. After all, it only happens when a living person comes through, right? So that's the general way I would go with this. I want to talk about one other thing, though, in brief here, especially because I have been playing through Half-Life 2 recently. There is a difference between a dilemma and an artificial dilemma. A dilemma is when you have well established something as horrible and then you suddenly find you have to go that way. Now, that may not sound like a dilemma, but it is relevant because it not only does it have a good impact on the viewer, player in this case, but it is actually relevant to the plot and helps guide the story. The point I'm talking about, of course, is the fact that I have been forced into Ravenholm, which at this point, no less than 5 times it has been mentioned, is a really horrible place. Technically 6 if you count the visual references I get just going there and the corpses that have been burned to death and all sorts of horribleness. Duh. Before I even reach Ravenholm, just obviously not a place I want to go to. That the I obviously that's not a true dilemma. I really should say that properly. In this case, the dilemma would actually be the fact that the Combine base was attacked, and this is our response to getting out of it. I mention that though because in the actual episode they had an artificial dilemma. We don't think we're going to get Harry back, and so we're going to leave. I'm You see, I tend to define literary terms by how much they make me roll my eyes. I mean that basically sincerely. Thus, in this context, an artificial dilemma is something that makes me go, ugh. As the Voyager was starting to leave, and it's like, oh my god, and oh my god, is he going to get back in time? And are they going to detect him? And are they going to save him? Oh my god. The only thing I could think of was, as I'm watching this episode, I just finished watching this episode just before I started. I'm just sitting there like, no, there's no tension. There's no suspense. You know he's going to get back. You know he's going to get on the ship. It's so artificial. It's so needless. And as a writer, you have the power to decide whether or not that kind of dilemma exists. You'll notice I had no such dilemma in mind. There was how to deal with the aliens, which did end up resolving peacefully. That could count. And there was how to deal with the company, I suppose, but I wouldn't really count that as a dilemma. But there was no, oh my god, what's going to happen to Harry? No, 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 of course not, because it's not necessary. You don't have to write that sort of thing in. It is cheap when you do it poorly in the manner that they did in this episode. By contrast, oh my god, the Combine have found our location and we need to get out of there, is a real dilemma. Now, obviously, in Half-Life is an on-rails game. There's no variation, there's no choice. But the same could be said of a TV show, obviously. Their solution to that dilemma was to force you into the most nightmarishly horrible part of the game. Oh my god. And that had real tension, it had real impact, and it actually drove the direction of the plot. As opposed to being in equivalency in Half-Life, that scene, if that had been written by the Voyager staff, instead of, the Combine is attacked and we have to go to Ravenholm, it would have been, the Combine is attacked and oh no, now Alex is dangling off of a cliff. She's gonna fall. She's gonna fall. Oh my god. And then you grab her and she's okay. Or a dog grabs her or whatever, then okay. Or maybe you get her with the gravity gun, something like that. It's so cheap, it's so unnecessary, it doesn't add anything. And that's the extent of it. This is the important part. Imagine if that was the whole result of the Combine attack right there. Ah, cliff. And that's it. Highlighting those two right next to each other really does show the difference between good atmosphere and bad atmosphere. But anyways, I don't want to bash Voyager too much, so let's mention the one last section I haven't. Did I enjoy this episode in the day? Yeah, I kind of did, actually. Did I enjoy this episode now? Not as much, admittedly. I enjoyed the Harry scenes a little bit more than I remember, to be completely honest with you. I actually liked the way that was presented, and I thought the guest actor, the gentleman, not the woman, did a pretty good job of portraying someone who is questioning something that he, if I were to interpret it, doesn't actually believe in, if you follow me. Rather than, changing his beliefs, it's more like he doesn't actually believe in it to begin with, and was always hesitant about it. And now that he has something to latch onto, he is going to take action on it. By contrast, the person who played his wife just played a harpy, and that was just doing a disservice. But the other side of the story was just irritating to the point of aggravating. The only part I liked out of it at all was the fact that the only person who was treating her with any level of respect or dignity was Kess, which doesn't surprise me, of course, because I like how they portrayed Kess. But anyways, I'm going to go and go someplace warmer. I'll talk to you guys later.